Hey, how's everybody doing today? Today we'll be learning how to save that bread by making that bread in the comfort of your own home. I'll be taking you through a step-by-step guide to making a delicious French loaf using everyday household ingredients with the addition of yeast, providing tips along the way to ensure success. I'm going to start by introducing our ingredients. You'll need 2 tablespoons of yeast, a half cup of warm water, 2 cups of hot water, 3 tablespoons of sugar, 2.5 teaspoons of salt, a third cup of oil, 6.5 cups of flour, and 1 whisked egg to brush on the bread. The total time for our process is around 1 hour and 5 minutes, which may need to be extended to ensure proper proofing is achieved. The prep time will take around 45 minutes, which may need to be extended 10 to 30 minutes if further proofing is necessary. Our dough will then bake in the oven for 20 minutes and our process will be complete. Our recipe will yield 3 loaves, each around a foot in length. Before we jump into the step-by-step guide, I'd like to introduce everyone to the fermentation process. After all, this is the science behind the rising of dough, which every baker knows is the most important. This is an automatic process that converts sugars and starches into simpler substances. In baking, fermentation causes yeast and bacteria to convert sugars into carbon dioxide. We can break fermentation of bread into 3 stages. Pre-fermenting, which is the flour, yeast, and water are fermented. Proofing, this occurs when the dough is made up and is set to rise before baking. And the actual baking, when the loaves are expanded due to yeast and steam generation. Alright, now we'll get into our step-by-step guide. To start, you want to dissolve your yeast into a half a cup of warm water. You want to make sure the water is warm, not too hot, not too cold. You want to let this mix proof for 10 minutes around 75 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the usual room temperature. Now in a separate bowl, combine the hot water, sugar, salt, oil, and 3 cups of flour. A hand mixer is recommended for this step as it can be very straining on your wrists. Now you want to add the yeast mixture to this bowl and mix it together for around 20 more seconds. Now we want to add the remaining 3.5 cups of flour to this mixture. We add this flour 1 cup at a time, mixing after each addition. A very good tip for this step is to pay attention for the mixture to start pulling away from the bowl. When it starts pulling away altogether and not sticking to the sides of the bowl, this means your dough is ready. Now we want to separate the dough into 3 equal pieces as seen in the picture shown. You can estimate with your eyes, but if you are very particular or just fear you might separate them uneven, you may want to weigh them with a kitchen scale. On a floured surface, roll each piece of dough into a 9 by 12 inch rectangle using a rolling pin. Ensure to roll on a floured surface to prevent the dough from sticking. You may even want to lightly rub some flour on the rolling pin itself. Now you want to roll each rectangle like a jelly roll, making them into a cylindrical shape. By tapping the sides of the bread with your open hands, you can shape it into a French loaf and smooth out the edges. I recommend even putting a little bit of flour on your hands to make sure the dough doesn't stick to them. Place each loaf on a greased baking pan as seen, facing the seam from rolling face down on the pan. Using a knife, make 3 to 4 equally spaced diagonal cuts, each about 1/4 inch deep into the bread, also as seen in the picture. You can also see in this picture how the loaf shape was formed and the dough was smoothed, as described in the previous step when you're patting the sides with your hands. So at this point, you want to have your whisked egg in a bowl, and you want to dip your baking brush in it and brush lightly on top of each loaf of bread. And when done, you want to let your dough rise for 30 to 40 minutes in a warm place, which I recommend to be around 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Some people even put their oven on a low warm setting for this. This is the proofing that was mentioned earlier that may take an extra 10 to 30 minutes, so pay close attention to the rate at which your dough is rising. Now our French loaves are ready for baking. Heat your oven to 370 degrees Fahrenheit and bake the loaves for 18 to 22 minutes. Pay close attention to your bread though. If it is not golden brown by this time, just give it an extra few minutes. A pro baking tip: allow freshly cooked French loaves to cool for at least 20 minutes before cutting. This ensures your bread will retain its shape and cut smoothly. By following this simple guide, you now have 3 French loaves, each around 12 inches in length, with a perfect golden brown finish along the top. Bread making is a rewarding art for bakers, and one that usually takes a few attempts before you achieve that bakery level result you desire. Keep this in mind and don't get discouraged if it doesn't go exactly as planned. Pay close attention during the steps and tips, but always remember to enjoy the bread making process. You're on your way to becoming a bread making professional. Thank you guys for listening, and good luck on your future baking endeavors.